What if the reason you are watching this video right now is not simply curiosity? What if, somewhere deep inside, you have been searching for an answer to a question you cannot fully explain? Why am I here? Why was I born into this particular time? Why does the world seem to be changing so quickly? And perhaps most importantly, why do I feel different? According to the spiritual teachings associated with KRYON, humanity may be moving through a profound period of transformation, a period in which old patterns are being challenged, a period filled with uncertainty, conflict, fear, and yet, strangely, also hope. For some people, the world appears to be falling apart. But for others, something entirely different is happening. They are waking up. They are becoming quieter inside. They are questioning the things they once believed. They are searching for something deeper. And KRYON's message asks us to consider a fascinating possibility. What if the chaos we see around us is not the beginning of the end, but the final struggle of an old way of thinking? And if that is true, then perhaps you are here for a reason. For those unfamiliar with the name, KRYON is associated with a modern spiritual and metaphysical teaching centered around consciousness, human potential, compassion, and the evolution of humanity. According to this spiritual perspective, humanity is not standing still. We are changing, not only technologically, not only socially, but internally. The teachings often speak about a shift in consciousness, a movement away from fear, separation, and survival, and toward greater awareness, compassion, and connection. Of course, these ideas belong to the realm of spiritual belief and metaphysical interpretation. They are not established scientific facts, but perhaps their value lies in the questions they invite us to ask. What kind of world are we creating? What kind of people are we becoming? And what happens when millions of individuals begin asking those questions at the same time? One of the most important ideas in KRYON's teachings is the concept of the old soul. But what exactly is an old soul? It does not mean you are physically old. You could be 20 years old and feel like an old soul. You could be 70 and never relate to the concept at all. In this spiritual tradition, an old soul is someone whose consciousness is believed to carry a deep accumulation of experience. Imagine that your life is only one chapter in an enormous book. You remember the chapter you are living now, but according to the metaphysical concept of reincarnation, there may be countless chapters that came before. Different lives, different families, different cultures, different challenges, different lessons. And although you may not consciously remember those experiences, perhaps something remains. A feeling, an instinct, a wisdom you cannot explain. And this is where KRYON's teachings introduce another fascinating concept, the Akash. In this spiritual perspective, the Akash can be understood as a kind of energetic record of the soul's journey. Not a physical library with books and shelves, but a symbolic archive of experience. Every lesson, every challenge, every act of love, every moment of courage, every experience that has shaped the journey of consciousness. Again, this is a metaphysical belief, not a scientific conclusion. But imagine for a moment that such a record existed. Imagine that somewhere within you there were traces of wisdom accumulated over countless experiences. Would that explain why some people seem naturally drawn toward compassion? Why others feel strangely connected to ancient cultures? Why certain places feel familiar even when we have never been there. Why some people have an unexplainable feeling that they are here for something important. KRYON's message suggests that the old soul may be beginning to touch this deeper wisdom, not by remembering every past life, but by recognizing something within. A quiet knowing, a deeper awareness, a feeling that fear is no longer the only way to respond to the world. Look around. The world is changing at an extraordinary speed. Technology is transforming the way we live. Information travels across the planet in seconds. Artificial intelligence is reshaping entire industries. Political divisions are becoming more intense. Wars continue. Economic uncertainty affects millions of people. And every day, we are surrounded by more information than any generation before us. It is easy to feel overwhelmed. It is easy to believe that everything is getting worse. But KRYON's teachings invite us to look at this period from another perspective. What if transformation is uncomfortable? What if old systems resist change? What if humanity must first recognize the limitations of fear before it can choose something different? This does not mean that suffering is an illusion. It does not mean that conflict should be ignored. And it certainly does not mean that we should simply sit back and wait for the world to change. Instead, perhaps the question is, how do we respond? Do we add more fear to the world? Or do we bring something different? Within the KRYON spiritual narrative, the year 2026 is described as part of a significant period of transition. Not because one magical event suddenly changes everything, but because humanity may be entering a longer process of transformation, a movement away from what is described as an old energy, an energy of division, competition, fear, control, and toward a different possibility, a consciousness based on connection, compassion, understanding, and responsibility. For some people, this idea may sound impossible. After all, how can we speak about a new consciousness while conflict still exists? How can we speak about hope when the news often seems filled with darkness? Perhaps that is exactly the point. Hope has no meaning if everything is already perfect. Compassion has no meaning if no one is suffering. Courage has no meaning if there is nothing to fear. Maybe transformation does not happen because the darkness disappears overnight. Maybe transformation happens because human beings begin responding differently to the darkness. Perhaps you have felt it. Maybe you are no longer interested in arguing about everything. Maybe you have started protecting your peace. Maybe certain friendships no longer feel right. Maybe you have become tired of endless negativity. Maybe you spend less time trying to impress people and more time asking yourself, what actually matters? For some, this may simply be a natural part of growing older. For others, it may feel like something deeper. KRYON's teachings describe this as an awakening of consciousness, a moment when a person begins to recognize that the external world cannot always determine their internal state. You cannot control every event. You cannot control every person. You cannot control every headline. But perhaps you can control how much fear you allow to live inside you. You can pause. You can breathe. You can choose not to react immediately. And that simple pause may be more powerful than you realize. Higher consciousness is often misunderstood. Some people imagine that becoming spiritually aware means becoming superior. But according to KRYON's message, it may mean exactly the opposite. The more you understand, the more humble you become. because you begin to realize that every person has a story. Every person carries pain you may never see. Every person is trying to survive their own experience. You stop asking, why are they like this? And you begin asking, what happened to them? That is compassion. Not agreeing with everything, not accepting harmful behavior, but understanding that hatred rarely creates healing. A truly awakened person does not believe they are above humanity. They recognize that they are part of it. You are not above anyone. You are part of everyone. And perhaps that is one of the deepest messages of all. One of the difficult questions raised in this spiritual message is simple. Why does war still exist? Why, after thousands of years of human civilization, do we continue repeating the same patterns? Fear, power, revenge, division, the belief that one group must destroy another. KRYON's teachings describe these patterns as expressions of an old energy. But even if we look at this idea symbolically, we can recognize something important. Humanity cannot create peace using only the tools of hatred. At some point, something must change. And perhaps that change begins closer to home than we think. How do we speak to people who disagree with us? How quickly do we judge? How easily do we spread anger online? How often do we allow fear to control our decisions? We may not be able to solve every conflict on Earth, but we can ask ourselves whether we are contributing to the consciousness that created those conflicts, or to something better. KRYON's message repeatedly returns to one powerful idea: compassion. But compassion is not weakness. It does not mean doing nothing. It does not mean allowing injustice. Compassion can be action, helping someone who needs help, listening when someone feels alone, protecting the vulnerable, choosing understanding instead of immediate hatred, offering kindness when the world expects anger. These actions may seem small, but consider this. The world is made of billions of human interactions. Every day, every conversation, every decision, every reaction. What happens when one person becomes slightly more compassionate? Perhaps nothing dramatic happens, but what if millions of people do the same? A culture begins to change, and perhaps consciousness itself changes, one person at a time. Take a moment and imagine something. Imagine a world where children do not grow up surrounded by war. Imagine families no longer waiting for loved ones to return. Imagine cities rebuilding. Imagine people who once lived in fear finally sleeping peacefully. Imagine former enemies sitting at the same table. Imagine technology being used not only to compete, but to solve human problems. Is such a world guaranteed? No. Is it easy? Certainly not. But every human achievement begins with the ability to imagine something that does not yet exist. Before a bridge is built, someone imagines it. Before a cure is discovered, someone believes it may be possible. Before peace can become reality, humanity must first believe that peace is worth creating. And perhaps that is why visualization matters. Not because imagination alone changes the world, but because imagination can change what we are willing to work for. And now, we return to the question that began this journey. Why are you here? Maybe you have asked this question during a difficult night. Maybe you have asked it after losing something important. Maybe you have asked it while looking at the stars. Or perhaps you have never asked it directly, but something inside you has always been searching. According to the concept of the old soul, perhaps you are not here simply to observe history. Perhaps you are here to participate in it. Not necessarily by becoming famous, not necessarily by changing the entire planet, but through the choices you make, the people you help, the fear you refuse to spread, the compassion you choose, the wisdom you share. Maybe your purpose is not one enormous mission waiting somewhere in the future. Maybe your purpose is happening right now, in the way you live, in the way you treat people, in the person you are becoming. Perhaps the greatest question is not, what is going to happen to the world? Perhaps the greater question is, who are we becoming while the world changes? Because history is not created only by powerful leaders. It is not created only by governments, or technology, or war. History is also created quietly, by ordinary people, by small decisions, by moments of courage, by acts of compassion, by one person choosing not to spread more darkness. If the spiritual message of KRYON teaches us anything, perhaps it is this: you do not have to be afraid of change. You can observe the world without allowing the world to destroy your inner peace. You can see suffering without losing your compassion. You can recognize darkness without becoming darkness yourself. And maybe, just maybe, the reason you feel that something is changing is because something inside you is changing too. So take a breath. Step away from the noise for a moment. Listen to the silence. And ask yourself, why am I here? Why now? What am I becoming while the world changes? Perhaps you already know the answer, even if you cannot yet put it into words. Perhaps the wisdom you have been searching for has been quietly growing inside you all along. And perhaps your purpose is not to escape this moment in history. Perhaps you came here to experience it, to understand it, to bring something better into it. A little more peace, a little more wisdom, a little more compassion. And perhaps 2026 is not the end of something. Perhaps it is the beginning of a question, the beginning of an awakening. And for those who are ready to listen, perhaps the beginning of something entirely new.